Hello and welcome to a new edition of the reading stream. Today I'm feeling at least a little bit better, so I think we'll go on with a little bit more than last time. Also, I started reading some behind the scenes um, material for some other videos. Let me just bring the setup back front and this should be okay. Yeah, we'll save that for later and let's go on. The opening for Eisenhower to be called to Washington was created by trouble on the staff of the Army during the dizzying days after Pearl Harbor. Frank McCarthy, Marshall's junior aide and decades later the producer of the movie Patton, remembered that on the day of the attack, Brigadier General Leonard Garrow, the chief of the War Plans Division, which oversaw military operations, was nervous as a girl, terribly disturbed and concerned, and he didn't seem to be making good decisions. He didn't radiate confidence, let's put it that way. In the wake of that performance, Marshall had one comment, McCarthy said. Get that fellow Eisenhower. Ironically, Ike had been Garrow's study partner at Command and General Staff College. As he hurried to leave San Antonio for Washington on that Friday afternoon in December 1941, Eisenhower was far from pleased. This message of summons from Marshall's office was a hard blow. He would remember. Ike already had missed combat in World War I. Should I keep it as World War I or in one World War as it is in the book? I think I'll keep it as it is in the book. So okay. Ike already had missed combat in one World War, having been assigned to a stateside training job. Now it looked as if he would be sidetracked into another staff job. I hoped in any new war to stay with troops, Eisenhower later explained. Being ordered to a city where I had already served a total of 8 years would mean, I thought, a virtual repetition of my experience in World War I. But this would prove to be perhaps the most momentous weekend of Eisenhower's life, the beginning of both his climb to the top of the military and his subsequent political career. He had missed the last passenger train heading east that day from San Antonio, so he had an Army cargo aircraft fly him along the treetops through stormy weather to Dallas, where he caught up with the eastbound Blue Bonnet Express. Finding all the train's seats taken, he sat on his suitcase in an aisle. William Kittrell, okay. William Kittrell. Okay, what the hell is this microphone performance? Is this continuing? Holy shit, I sound like the radio. Okay. Where does this start? Of my experience in World War I. Oh my god. So let's see. Was a hard blow, he would remember. I already had missed. Okay. So this is not alright. This is not cool. Let's see. So okay. The opening for Eisenhower. Hold up. Let's see earlier. Okay, so it is some other issue. Let me close this. Save. Okay, so since we're doing with a little bit of technical difficulties, I'll close the stream and let me just save project as. Yeah. So I have to keep a surprise what the or what the untitled video is about. So, ta-da! Oh, 1 and 2 and 3. Okay, so we're closing Audacity when we're opening it up again. Okay, recent files, exactly this. Okay, let's go a little bit more back. Okay, something is happening in this. Something is happening in this neck of the woods. So let's go on. World War One. Okay, so but this would prove to be perhaps. Okay, so there is. Let me see if this has something to do with something else. So. Okay, so it's not a speaker's issue. Yeah, okay. We're closing Audacity again, we're opening again. Yes, yes. So... oh, oops. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, so it works in here. But why doesn't it work in there? Okay, so... open recent... Okay, let me just export this as MP3 because I don't want to redo the whole Audacity donor reading. So again, export. And 1 or 30. Yes, let's see how much the... okay, 30 seconds is decent. I mean, that was a surprising development. Oh, alright, I can't modify anything while it's going on. At least nobody sees this that well. Well, the bad part, if this effect is permanent, is that I only have the reading streams for backup. So let's see, where is Audacity? Here. Enter in donor reading. And Thomas Ricks the General, okay. Falla Guerrera. Hello, Random Brown. The General. Because it was the... okay. So I have no idea how it got this best muffled feeling about it. Let's see again. Yeah, that was a good enough sample. Hello, hello, hello. Let's see again. Now, if I copy in this file this output, I want to see what happens. To take a little bit of coffee, and let's hope it doesn't crash. And I'll take this opportunity to see what this Falla Guerrera means. Yeah, loading slow. And translate from Portuguese. Hello. Okay. Now I know. they learn. Oh, Jesus Christ. It doesn't respond. And oh, perfect. Command from Word. Okay. So we are resaving this project as the new. Where is Thomas Riggs the General? 3v2. Okay. Kittrell. Okay. William Kittermel. And we can get back in business. This was a surprisingly long detour for the day. So we're closing this and keeping this open. Ariel. William. Let's see. Kittrell, a Texas lawyer he knew, came across him perched there. General, I've got a drawing room back there. Would you like to come back and sit? He said. Kittrell was an attorney for Sid Richardson, the oil tycoon, who was relaxing in his own special rail car. Eisenhower accepted the invitation, and the three talked and played poker for much of the ride to Washington, D.C. Early on Sunday, December 14th, Eisenhower trained at the Capitol's Union Station. That was probably caught by the microphone. Train at the Capitol's Union Station. Yeah, it caught. Eisenhower. So I'll just go after Eisenhower so it exists, okay? Detrained at the Capitol's Union Station, where he was met by his brother Milton. 11 years later, Richardson, the card-playing oil man, would be... for real now? For real? Seriously? Would be... for playing oil man. Let's see what this was about. Nothing important, just AA. Aaron's gonna have the field day if he sees this. Where was I? Would become a major financial backer of Eisenhower's presidential campaign, opposing a more conservative group of Texas oilmen backing Ike's old boss, General Douglas MacArthur. A few hours after arriving in Washington, Eisenhower entered the office of General Marshall, with whom he would have an encounter even more fateful than the one on the train. He didn't know the army chief well, having met him only twice and having spoken to him for only about 2 minutes each time. Marshall clearly had heard good reports about the newly minted brigadier general, as he had invited him to come teach at the infantry school at Fort Benning. But on this Sunday, following Pearl Harbor, when Ike came into his office in the munitions building, Marshall got right to the point. I walked into his office, and within 10 seconds, he was telling me the problem he wanted me to attack. He just said, "Look, there are 2 things we have got to do. We have got to do our best in the Pacific, and we've got to win this whole war. Now, how are we going to do it? Now, this is going to be your problem." In summary, the question was, Marshall said, what should be our general line of action? Both knew what that meant. Where do we draw the line and begin to fight? And do we abandon our men in the Philippines? This was the kind of trial Marshall had in mind when he shared with George Fielding Eliot his thought about testing rising officers. "Give me a few hours," Eisenhower requested. It was a difficult assignment, but the kind that I particularly relished. He would write decades later that, "I love to do that kind of work. Practical problems have always been my equivalent of crossword puzzles." "All right," the Army chief agreed, turning away and then leaving the office to make Sunday calls on General Pershing and the Secretary of War Henry Stimson. And the Secretary. and the War Secretary Henry Stimson. Eisenhower sat quietly in a nearby office in the munitions building, which would be turned down in the 1960s and eventually appraised by, among other things, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The question before me was almost unlimited in its applications, Eisenhower later wrote. When Marshall returned that afternoon from his round of visits, Eisenhower gave him a 3-page typed memo that laid out what he thought the American approach to World War II should be. The Philippines, Ike wrote, The Philippines, Ike wrote, were beyond hope. Don't be sentimental. Give up the islands and leave American and Filipino friends there to their fate while giving them what small aid we can. Fall back and regroup. Nor should the army heed the panicky calls of West Coast politicians for military protection for their cities, which would divert desperately needed troops and gear. Rather, the initial focus of American military operations against Japan should be concentrate on faraway Australia. Oh, should concentrate, so not should be concentrate. Should concentrate on faraway Australia, which would have to be launching platform for the counteroffensive. Thus, the top military priority in the Pacific would be to keep open the air and sea lanes to it, which meant holding Hawaii, Fiji, New Zealand, and other islands along the route, as well as Australia itself. That task was essential, and to carry it out successfully was worth almost any risk and expenditure. Marshall read the memo, then looked up. I agree with you, he told the young brigadier. Eisenhower had passed his first major test. It was not a test of national strategic planning, but almost certainly one of personality and intellect. That is, Eisenhower, in his memo, simply elaborated on strategic decisions that the American military establishment had been mulling for the previous decade, when it was all but ignored by the public during the depths of the Depression. In the early 1920s, the Navy's War Plan Orange, written in for a conflict with Japan, had called for aggressively defending Manila, but by the early 1930s, the plan had been revised in a cautious manner and called for forfeiting the entire Philippine archipelago. In 1939, Major General John DeWitt, commander of the Army War College, emphatically stated in an internal discussion of war plans that we cannot, even as conditions are today, reinforce the Philippines. We are going to lose them right away. We are 9,000 miles away. The Japanese are next door. This conclusion was made policy in a series of secret discussions between the American military and the British military starting in January 1941. The Navy's Rainbow 5 Global War Plan stated in May 1941 that no army reinforcements will be sent to the Philippine coastal frontier. So, rather than looking for strategic guidance, Marshall was more likely seeing if Ike had sufficient ice in his vein to recommend that thousands of his old friends and comrades in the Philippines be abandoned, condemning them to death or a war spent as prisoners of the Japanese. Marshall also probably wanted to gauge how much of a hold General MacArthur still had on Ike. It is not clear whether Marshall knew that, in 1938, MacArthur had put aside Ike as his senior staff member and replaced him with the sycophantic Richard Sutherland, who would serve MacArthur through World War II, faithfully, except for repeatedly disobeying orders to get rid of the mistress he kept nearby. Ike found out about his demotion only when he returned from leave. When he protested, MacArthur coldly told him he was free to seek another assignment. At any rate, Eisenhower passed Marshall's first test. Marshall looked up from the memo and immediately gave the brigadier another one. Tell me how to implement this. Ike later would recall how Marshall concluded the conversation on that grim Sunday in December 1941. Eisenhower, Marshall said, the department is filled with able men who analyze their problems but feel compelled always to bring them for me. Sorry about that. Always to bring them to me for final solution. I must have assistants who will solve their own problems and tell me later what they have done. Ike thought to himself that as Marshall spoke, his eyes were awfully cold. Prioritizing tends to be forgotten aspect of strategy. A forgotten, sorry about that. And since I paused here, I want to see how much is left. A manageable amount. Tends to be a forgotten aspect of strategy. The art of strategy is foremost not about how to do something, but about what to do. In other words, the first problem is to determine what the real problem is. There are many aspects to any given problem, but the strategist must sort through them and determine its essence, for there lies the key to its solution. Eisenhower clearly understood the need to separate the essential from the merely important. In March 1942, he and an aide drafted a long memo for Marshall that differentiated primary war aims from lesser ones. Hold up, I like this sequence. I really. And I paused the recording at a very opportune time. So, So I'll highlight this section, underline text, and underline it with red. Red though, let's see, another color would suit better. Blue? I guess blue's alright. Simsenhor. Okay, Roundan, if you're going to post in chat, I'm going to politely ask you to post things I don't have to constantly translate. So, I don't even know what that yes sir was for. And I do appreciate a multinational audience, but even though I'm not English myself, this is an English official channel, so it would be better if I understood Portuguese, but I don't. Now let's see, where was I in the recording? Primary war aims from lesser ones. Okay, so here. The three primary goals, they wrote, had to be the security of England, the retention of Russia in the war as an active ally, and the defense of the Middle East. Holding the Middle East prevented the possible link-up on land of German and Japanese forces in, perhaps, Iran. Also kept open the supply line to Russia, at a time when keeping Russia in the war was indeed essential. Everything else was secondary, they noted, in a classic summary of the nature of strategic decision-making. All other operations must be considered highly desirable rather than in the mandatory class. The implication of that conclusion, they continued. Let's see, the implication, okay. The implication of that conclusion that... Dios mío. The implication of that conclusion, they continued, meant that victory in Europe had to take precedence over winning in the Pacific. Again, this was not original thinking. If anything, it made explicit the Army's version of a quiet understanding that already existed with the British. Where was I? Okay, there. With the British, but it showed a clear grasp of how to implement that understanding. Eisenhower himself also could be coldly calculating about the risk. In his memoirs, he recalled making the decision to put 14,000 soldiers above... Okay, this is not a good sign. Thousand soldiers about hmm, 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 hmm. Thousand soldiers aboard the Mary Queen. I cannot believe that I'm mistaken 3 times. Thousand soldiers aboard the Queen Mary and sent it through submarine infested waters, knowing that its lifeboats and rafts could only hold 8,000. He had calculated that, while it lacked armed escort, the ocean liner was fast enough to outrun German submarines, but not if it encountered one by chance. He had experienced some anxiety when the ship put into Brazilian port and an Italian radio transmission was intercepted reporting its presence and later the decision in which it sailed. Oh, the direction, for crying out loud. So I stumbled twice in here. And an Italian radio transmission. Okay, so a Brazilian port. Put into a Brazilian port and an Italian radio transmission was intercepted reporting its presence and later the direction in which it sailed. 6 months later, in October 1942, Eisenhower would write to Marshall from London, laying out a fairly clear plan for the remainder of the war. Looking forward through the fog and chaos of war is never easy, but Eisenhower, having settled into his new post as US Commander for Operations in Europe, made it look so when he confidently wrote, even before US forces were engaged against the Germans in North Africa in Operation Torch, that he could envision launching a decisive blow in the spring of 1944. In this scenario, the summer of 43 would be used for building up the necessary forces in Great Britain, firmly establishing ourselves in favorable positions in the Southwest Pacific and exploiting Torch. That, of course, would prove to be a persistent sentence. Marshall knew that he could tutor the bright, ambitious Eisenhower in strategic planning in part because Ike already embodied Marshall's insistence on a team spirit in his senior leaders. Military historians tend to dwell on Eisenhower's personal cooperativeness, and indeed, he was cooperative, unusually so, with other branches of the military, with civilian American officials, and with representatives of other nations. It was a quality not shared by many of his army peers, some of whom seemed to revel in distrusting the British. It may have been Ike's most important personal aspect. It may have been Ike's most important personal asset. Some men reach the top through a tremendous intellect, a ruthless disposition, a burning ambition, or an utter disregard for the feelings of others, wrote Major General Sir Francis de Guingard. Okay, I butchered that in. Let's see, the chat has nothing new to add. Alright. Oh, no, 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 no. Major General Sir Francis de Guingand, Chief of Staff through most of World War II to General Bernard Montgomery, who certainly excelled at disregarding the feelings of others. But this was not the case with Eisenhower, de Guingand wrote. Oh, I think I have one more page left, so yep, pretty much. Continued. I think his success was largely due to his great human qualities, his sense of humor, his common sense, and his essential honesty and integrity. He inspired love and unfailing loyalty. He had a magic touch when dealing with conflicting issues or clashes of personalities, and he knew how to find a solution among the lines of compromise without surrendering a principle. He is, in fact, a great Democrat. Ike's British subordinates also found him very American. Here was somebody who seemed eager to cast aside conventions and get on with the job, was the first impression he gave to Major General Sir Kenneth Strong, his intelligence chief for most of the war. He seemed to represent a new and interesting world. Interestingly, one of the officers on his staff Strong deemed most able was Enoch Powell, who before the war was a brilliant professor of Greek. During the war, turned sharply anti-American, and after the war, would become prominent as an anti-immigration politician in the British Parliament. Powell's edition of Thucydides's Peloponnesian War is still studied and respected. The sort of man who became a general in the American military was different from the British mold of minor aristocrats and country gentlemen. One officer who shot to prominence, J. Lawton Collins, was the offspring of Irish immigrants. Maurice Rose was the son of a rabbi. Several other senior generals, such as Clarence Hubner, Courtney Hodge, Ben Lear, Walter Kruger, and Troy Middleton, had risen from the enlisted ranks. An armored general, Ernst Harman, was an orphan. One of the fastest risers in the army of World War II, the paratrooper James Gavin, had been adopted out of an orphanage at a Pennsylvania coal mining family and, not wanting to become a miner himself, had run away from home as a teenager to join the army. Alright, this is all very interesting. Control S. And let's see. I'm on page 49. I'm probably going to need to prolong the reading streams, but after I become accustomed to doing a private reading stream for the patrons, I'll end the stream here, and we'll continue tomorrow. Most likely, I don't think I'll start Virtues and Valor, or Valor and Virtues? I have to decide on a serious name for a little bit longer. And I probably need to prioritize writing the script for Ruins of Paradigm. But in the meantime, if any of you enjoyed the stream, be sure to share it around to your relevant communities, or just well, these are reading streams for now, so it's not that big of a deal. I will think of whether to keep the reading streams as reading streams, or whether should I move to some geopolitics news readings and keep the readings private and just upload the finished chapters or books for donors. So yeah, that's in the books. I'll have to decide with my current audience size, with currently no more than 3 people in the chat. Yeah, it's a little early to start voting, but sounds like an okay idea, at least to me, to see a little bit more days with geopolitics. But anyway, the stream will conclude here. Thank you everyone for watching and commenting in the chat, and until next time, let us all toast for mass creation and have a good one.